Greetings all, welcome to the inaugural episode of Pen and Paint, the channel where I merge my love of miniature painting with my growing passion for writing. In this episode, we'll be painting the player models for the excellent sci-fi survival horror board game Nemesis, produced by Awaken Realms. This is a fantastic game which I highly recommend for those who like a bit of backstabbing in their cooperative experiences. In addition to the basic models, we'll also be painting the corpseified versions of the characters. Given the number of miniatures we have, we'll be painting at a fairly rapid pace, focusing on key details and using a limited color palette. The game art and support components provide each character with a unique color such as orange, purple, and red. We'll be painting all the models using the same sets of paints, save for a single accent color unique to each model that matches the game art. The models have already been primed black, followed by a multi-stage dry brushing. The bases have already been painted in neutral gray tones. A complete list of all paints used is on screen now. Paints will also be noted as they are used. Video timestamps are available for each step of the painting process. As this is the first episode, I am treating it as a glorified test video, where I explore the basics of video and audio recording and editing. I will warn you that both the video and audio quality are rough, and that the painting process is rather scattershot. If you'd like to read today's story or listen to it without the video, links to pure text and audio versions are in the video description below. Feel free to mute the video if you're only here for the painting. The story for today's episode is Last Meal, a tale of space terrors, cramped confines, and a rumbly tummy. This story is rated E for everyone. The duct took a long, slow curve to the right. Small diodes of light pulsed or held steady, dimly reflected in dull and unadorned metal. Hydraulic lines wound across the lower gratings while high-pressure pipes elbowed their ways along the walls, further constricting the narrow space. The air was heavier here, warm and sluggish. Condensation had already soaked through his gloves, his knees and lower legs uncomfortably wet. He paused, feeling the low, rhythmic motions of the recycler in the room below. He strained his ear and nodded. At least we shall not die of thirst, he thought. His stomach gave a rumble of dissent. Barrows resumed his slow crawl. As he exited the duct and entered the access conduit proper, the communication call light on his wrist began blinking in sequence. He stopped. It fell dark for several seconds, then repeated. Mackenzie had made it to the bridge. Barrows signaled back confirmation before continuing forward. When he and Mackenzie had last met, Barrows had disabled the audio channel of both their communicators. After what happened to Dubois, they decided radio silence was the safest option. Where a sudden burst of static or call for help could draw unwanted attention, the flickering of a single indicator light, however sudden or violent, was unlikely to be noticed. Dubois. Barrows gave an inward sigh. He had liked the doctor. An arrogant, self-absorbed prick, to be sure, but there was a deep, dry wit to the man, and humor of any stripe made extended missions far less tedious. The good doctor had even condescended an approval of Barrows's own efforts, recognizing, however grudgingly, his knowledge of the Nemesis's internal workings. Surgeon to the ship, Dubois had said. Dr. Barrows. He smiled as he wiped a hand across his chest, adding another stained smear to the once burnt orange of his thick coveralls. Yes, he had liked Dubois. At least, until Barrows discovered that it had been Dubois who had murdered Mercedes, and not one of those things. The engineer sighed again and swung into a conduit branch that would take him directly to the ship's starboard jump drive. He had liked Mercedes even more. Barrows glanced down at the end of the conduit and froze. It was a small thing. A bit of moisture on the far wall of a T-junction, caught in the soft access lighting. Some condensation that no one would take notice of, except a surgeon of ships. Very, very slowly, Barrows began moving backwards, his eyes intent and steady on the damp patch. Water in the ducts was to be expected. Coolant, fresh and wastewater pipes, hydraulic lines, air ventilation runs, and heat exchange units all fought for space in the cramped confines, the often extreme range of competing temperatures invariably leading to moisture buildup despite significant insulation measures. The service ducts of a starship were neither clean nor terribly safe places to be, and it was for this later reason that only Barrows and his professional ilk had access to them. Even Captain Brago technically needed permission to enter them, though he had, of course, an override keycard for emergencies. Barrows made it back to the conduit intersection, heart hammering. Water in service ducts was one thing. Water in access corridors was an entirely different matter, especially when it clung thickly against a wall instead of running down it. The mechanic was suddenly and keenly aware of the relative expanse of space around him now. He was still on his hands and knees, but his shoulders were no longer crushed against his body, and he no longer had to keep his head down. The hand's breadth of space between him and the walls and ceiling became cavernous expanses. His heart pounded, the feeling of exposure forcing his breathing to come short and shallow. Barrows glanced nervously around at the two other corridors, searching for more signs and finding none. He looked back the way he had come and considered returning to the relative safety of the service ducts. They webbed their way through the entire ship, a capillary network that fed every room, corridor, and computer terminal, affording barely enough space for a human to slither through, let alone one of those terrifying creatures. Well, most of them, anyways. Barrows shivered at the memory, unconsciously scraping the sole of his right boot against a corner. The ducts would be safer, yes, but he checked his watch. But there simply wasn't time. His stomach rumbled painfully again, reminding him that he still hadn't eaten anything since emerging from hypersleep. Food. He had one task left before he could eat. Barrows took a deep, steadying breath and released it in a long, meditative exhale. He turned down the opposing passage. The port side drive was clear across the other side of the ship, but it would be significantly faster than rooting through the twisting maze of ducts. It also had the advantage of passing directly over the canteen. Keeping his eyes out for further signs of intrusion, Barrows mentally reviewed the contents of the Nemesis' mess hall. A porcini and fig frittata. Complex, but delicious. If there was ever a time to dip into his diminishing stash of freeze-dried ingredients, it was now. And Mackenzie would appreciate the effort. Barrows peered through the grate and scanned the room as best he could. It was hard to make out the contents of the storage room in the dim light. He had only briefly visited before hypersleep and couldn't exactly recall what crates and containers had been where, but nothing appeared out of place. Everything was neatly stacked and strapped. No lockers were torn open, no cases knocked over. A soft red glow from outside his range of view suggested the door was still sealed shut, though he knew that was no guarantee of safety. With one hand resting on the butt of his gun, Barrows used the other to pull a marker from his breast pocket. He slid it through the grate, gripped between two fingers. He tossed it as far as he could. There was a clatter of plastic and steel. He waited. No sound. No movement. Nothing. Barrows unlatched the grate and slid inside, making directly for the lockers. With one eye on the grate opening, he quickly and quietly gathered what he needed. Perhaps a Cajun Benedict, he thought, as he reset the grate. The sauce was easy enough, and he knew the ingredients would be there. Barrows peeked his head up from the vertical access chute and eyed the conduit in both directions. Clear. Yes, Eggs Benedict would do nicely. But not for Mackenzie. Their scout was famously intolerant of spicy food and probably wouldn't be appreciative of the heavy hollandaise. Light in the gut, light on the foot, she'd once remarked. Barrows felt at his own ample midsection. He could stand to be a little lighter on foot as well. It would make navigating the bowels of the ship easier. He grinned and chuckled softly, crawling onwards. A light breakfast then, but sweet. He sat and stared at his communicator, letting another half-minute tick off before trying again. It had been several minutes since Mackenzie sent the frantic message, the comm light rapidly blinking in Old Morse. Barrows had only caught the later half, and that too was cut short. A dull thud followed, echoing distantly through the access conduits, certain to attract unwanted attention. He tried one more time to signal Mackenzie. Still nothing. The mechanic pulled out a small kit and opened the communicator, risking precious minutes to confirm what he already knew. He spliced the responder unit through the transmitter, cycling it through Mackenzie's frequency. Now, rather than being picked up by Mackenzie's communicator, it would bounce off of her device en route to his own. Any message he sent would echo in his own communicator's indicator light. Assuming, of course, there was something to bounce off of. Barrows closed the communicator's front panel and put away his kit. He sat with his back to the wall, hesitating. He sent a single ping. Just a nibble, he thought. Bright, stark illumination filtered up through the vent, reflected off the clean, white surfaces of the canteen. The heavy aroma of fresh coffee, as yet untouched, caressed his nose, inviting him down. He caught a hint of sausage and a trace of the sharp, tangy syrup the company used in their baked beans. The pain in his stomach intensified. Barrows wiped his mouth. Within minutes of hypersleep wake-up procedures initiating, the ship's automated systems started prepping the crew's first meal. The disorienting effects of hypersleep made even simple tasks a challenge, and long experience had taught the engineers of deep space starships that the best way to get crew members functioning was hot, strongly flavored foods and copious quantities of caffeine. Given the mess of a morning he was having, however, the ship's Continental wasn't going to cut it, though a quick bite would suffice until he had time to make something proper. Barrows moved to release the final latch when a scraping sound gave him pause. He searched what parts of the canteen he could see when the sound came again. There. A flash of movement by the table. Barrows' breath caught as he sighted it. A glistening, stubby tail of purplish muscle flexed and coiled. Blunt spikes of blue and teal gleamed in the bright white light before disappearing under the table. He glanced at the serving station, then back to the table. "You can make it. It's just a small one." The grate was off and in his hands before he realized what he was doing. He stopped, put the grate back in place, secured the latches, and sat down to refocus. He studied the walls of the corridor, following the lines of the panels with a languid eye. He reached out and caressed the textured floor with a heavy gloved hand. The surgeon of ships surveyed the workings of the Nemesis, peering through its plasteel skin and around its titanium skeleton. He turned over each room in his mind, seeing them not as they were now, but as he imagined they were when she first set out from dry dock, when age had not yet set her to slow rot, nor recent horrors defiled her body. The soft pastels of her rooms easy on the eyes, the air as yet untainted by the faint scent of leaked oils and gases that no recycler, however efficient, could ever fully erase. Barrows imagined the fanfare of her maiden voyage and the elation and excitement her first crew must have felt. He both envied and pitied her first mechanic, who was both honored with such a beautiful charge and cursed with the boredom of a healthy patient. The Nemesis was by no means an old ship, ancient by the strict count of Terran years, certainly. The very nature of deep space vessels made even the youngest of them venerable compared to system-bound ships. Where intra-system haulers and transport ships had operational lifespans measured in decades, those of inter-system freighters and deep space reconnaissance ships were measured in centuries. The high rate of engine cycling and the stresses of atmospheric travel took their toll far more rapidly than long, slow burns in the spaces between stars. She may have been built when Barrows' grandparents were still crawling about on tiny hands and feet, but in terms of the number of operational missions run, the Nemesis was still in her prime, the lines of age only just beginning to accent her magisterial features. There were many centuries of service still ahead of her before her jump drives finally gave out, and her hull scrapped or repurposed. Or could have been many centuries. Barrows set his jaw, quashing the outcries of his stomach and the growing number of aches and pains in his body. He stretched his arms and legs as best he could in the narrow confines, then set himself back onto hands and knees. He continued his crawl towards the port drives, passing the canteen access grate without a glance. The duty of a starship's captain was to its mission first. Everything else, including the crew and the ship itself, came second. For those of Barrows' calling, however, their only duty was to the ship, and sometimes that meant easing the patient's passing. Barrows crawled on. It's not all that difficult to cripple a starship. Much like the human body, there are myriad of minor traumas that can hobble a massively complex, self-regulating ship. Severed coolant lines can freeze critical subsystems. Power surges from rogue solar emissions or plasma clouds can crack heat exchange units and boil entire compartments. And micrometeorites can, however unlikely, find the small, less protected observation ports and vent an occupied room. But to destroy a ship, to truly kill such a monstrous creature without literally flying it into a star, well, there was only one surefire way to do that. Barrows stepped back to review his handiwork. It wasn't pretty. Without access to an arc torch and welding rig, he was forced to plumb the secondary hydrogen fuel line into the jump drive's ancillary port with ceramic tape and Kevlar straps. The seal would hold long enough to get the job done, but it certainly wasn't his finest work. He and Mackenzie both knew that even if she could get to the bridge, there was no guarantee she could reset the Nemesis' navigation system, redirecting the ship to deep space or the nearby star. Brago had beelined for the bridge after waking up, ostensibly to check if it had been damaged, confirming on his return that the bridge was secure and that they were still on course. No one thought to ask if he had locked the controls. Only after Dubois' treachery was discovered did the paranoia set in, and every action became suspect. Which is why Barrows had just replumbed the Nemesis' heart. In about 40 minutes, the ship would begin its engine checks, culminating in the flushing of the main engine's firing chamber with liquid hydrogen for a test ignition. Now, a portion of that hydrogen would flood the singularity containment chamber of the jump drive, severely compromising the shielding. A disabled relief valve on the primary hydrogen fuel line meant the ignition would backfeed up the line, down through the secondary lines, and into the containment chamber. If the supercooled hydrogen wasn't enough to crack the chamber, the resulting detonation would. And when that happened, there won't even be debris, let alone monsters, Barrows whispered. He gathered up his tools, carefully stowing them away. The procedure had taken longer than expected. While there was time yet to get to the canteen, there wasn't enough to make a proper meal. He would have to content himself with sausage, beans, and coffee, all of which were, to the company's credit, very delicious. The coffee in particular was highly... Barrows froze. The engineer's hand inched towards his holster. The sickly sweet scent of cherries and curdled milk. His hand hovered over the grip, then withdrew. Barrows slowly raised his arms up, a smile of resignation forming on his lips. It's only fair, Barrows thought as he turned to face the horror approaching him, that at least one of us gets a last meal. Come and get it. That was Last Meal, inspired by the sci-fi board game Nemesis. I hope you enjoyed the story. Before I leave you, I'd like to show off the rest of the models I painted for my copy of the game. As you can see, there is still much to paint, as I have both the expansions and follow-up game Nemesis Lockdown to complete. If you already own board games with fancy models in them, I do recommend trying your hand at painting them. Even if you decide afterwards that miniature painting isn't the hobby for you, you've at least added a bit of color to your gaming experiences. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you have any suggestions, questions, or feedback on anything you've seen in this episode, please comment below. That's it for today. See you next time.